Thanks for joining us. You've tuned in to Arirang's Within the Frame. Live from Seoul, I'm Han Da-eun. North Korea continues to advance its military capabilities, testing upgraded multiple rocket launchers and suicide drones while working to deploy some 250 missile launchers along the border targeting South Korea. As Pyongyang intensifies its weapons development, Washington is reportedly showing signs of a shift in its nuclear strategy, raising concerns here in Seoul about North Korea's growing nuclear threat and U.S. nuclear umbrella. In today's episode, we decipher the latest North Korean activities and evolving nuclear policy of the U.S., which is on the brink of a significant leadership change. For some insights, we turn to Lim Eun-jung, Associate Professor of International Studies at Kongju National University. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us from the UK is Dr. John Nilsson-Wright, head of Japan and Korea's program at University of Cambridge's Center for Geopolitics. Always a pleasure to have you on our show.
Great to be here.
All right, Dr. Nilsson-Wright, let's kick things off with you. The U.S. has reportedly revised its nuclear strategic plan, and North Korea was quick to condemn the move, saying it's an attempt to justify Washington's dangerous use of nuclear weapons. What have you learned about Washington's new nuclear plan, and how do you see Pyongyang's reaction?
Well, there is no doubt that Washington has had to confront an increasingly challenging world in terms of its security interests. The new nuclear policy, which dates from March of this year, has been really driven by four key factors. First, of course, is the war in Ukraine. And the alarm on the part of the US administration dating back to 2022 that Russia under President Putin has been willing to push the envelope in terms of its own nuclear strategy. You may recall that back in October of 2022, there were real concerns based on traffic that American intelligence was intercepting between Russian commanders fighting in Ukraine, that the Russians were contemplating perhaps using tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. That higher level of risk, coupled with the second factor, which is the steady increase in China's nuclear capabilities and the perception that within the next 10 years, China will have reached a level of nuclear armament that is equivalent to the United States and Russia. And thirdly, the fact that China and Russia are now much more closely aligned as a part of the so-called axis of authoritarian regimes, increasingly cooperating in the military space. We've seen joint military exercises between Chinese and Russian air capability air forces near Alaska. There have been naval exercises in the South China Seas between Chinese and Russian naval vessels. Those factors have all raised the alarm in Washington that US doctrine needs to change to deal with a more coordinated nuclear threat from China and Russia, and also, and this is the fourth key factor, potentially from the DPRK. North Korea with some 60 nuclear weapons, perhaps as many as 90 or 100, if you add in its other capabilities, and now increasingly cooperating with Moscow as a result of the new strategic partnership between Russia and the DPRK. All of that adds up to a much graver coordinated nuclear threat from Moscow, Beijing, and the DPRK, and therefore the US has had to reassess its nuclear doctrine. And that's why we're seeing increasingly now in the public space with US officials talking about this new doctrine, a willingness on the part of Washington to think again about how best to confront not just Russia, as was the case during the Cold War, but a coordinated nuclear approach by those three countries, China, Russia, and potentially North Korea.
So the U.S. is certainly faced with greater nuclear threats coming from many different directions. Now, reports of Washington's new nuclear strategy drew an almost immediate response from North Korea, but the reclusive state still remains silent to President Yoon's new unification doctrine unveiled 2 weeks ago. Professor Lim, what are you reading into this?
as you know, the August 15 is absolutely important date for Korean people, and it's the day of liberation. And then during his speech at the stage, again, the President Yoon suggested so-called August 15 doctrine, which was reaffirmed the importance of freedom, and he also emphasized that Korean unification can contribute to the world peace and prosperity. So basically, the freedom, peace, prosperity, these three are the key words of the August 15 doctrine, I would say. Having had the doctrine, again, presented by the President Yoon, again, as you just pointed out, the Pyongyang seems to be pretty silent, which can be interpreted or regarded as an unusual reaction. No reaction is an unusual thing, because if we recall our memories, again, that they have condemned, for example, some, especially conservative governments' speech, those kind of doctrines with the very vocal words and, pretty furious criticism. However, again, at this time, it looks like they are more focusing on the Washington's changes in Washington's strategy rather than, again, some changes, even though it is a more like an upgraded version of our precedented governments. But anyhow, it looks like, again, they keep their silence on the August 15 doctrine. Of course, we can interpret this in two different ways, I would say. Again, if we take it very negatively, of course, they trying to be ignorant to whatever those changes made by our government. But at the same time, if we see it with some positive senses, I would say, again, that they might be trying to be more cautious about their own reaction to the doctrine, because rather than they respect us, of course they're not that much respectful for our government, but rather, again, it looks like they are cautious about the domestic reaction, because as the previous reports already said, more and more, again, the North Korean, those refugees or defectors, they are trying to come. And recently, again, we did have a high-profile diplomat who served in the Cuba. He also came to the south, our country. And according to his testimony, again, ever since North Korea, Pyongyang changed the wording, again, toward us, they use now as a separate country, as an enemy. And having had that, again, the North Korean people became very much frustrated, because they almost like lost a chance to be part of new Korea. So probably, this is my kind of just bare guess, but they might be more cautious about any of those, those domestic response. That is why probably they are trying to be silent to the August 15 doctrine, I would say.
So as you pointed out, North Korea seems to be much more concerned about what's coming out of the U.S. than from South Korea. And on that note, Dr. Nilsson-Wright, the denuclearization goal of North Korea has been removed from both U.S. Democratic and Republican policy platforms. Is Washington shifting away from its long-held goal of CVID, or complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of North Korea, and moving towards arms control?
Well, I mean, it's logical to assume that, given the state of North Korea's nuclear capabilities, that there might be a reluctant willingness on the part of some in the United States to suggest that the American approach should focus on arms control. And there have been some prominent voices, such as Bob Colucci, for example, a former official who negotiated with North Korea in the 1990s, who've made that argument. However, I would add a cautionary note. I think at this stage, both for the Republican and the Democrats, there's no real desire in the few weeks remaining before the November election to do anything that might be seen as creating instability or uncertainty on the Korean Peninsula. And where the Democrats are concerned, and their new candidate, Vice President Harris, I think it's a much more cautious, consistent approach, emphasizing the importance of a tough and resilient foreign policy, not a resiling from that goal of denuclearization. In fact, Senator Ben Cardin, the Democratic senator of the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has recently come out and said that Kamala Harris, if she's elected president, will be focused still on denuclearization. I think it's also important to recognize that from the point of view of the Biden administration, which has put so much emphasis on developing strong alliance ties with both South Korea and with Japan, there will have been a real sensitivity and recognition of doing nothing that would raise alarm bells in Seoul. So I think I would stress the importance of being cautious in not over-interpreting those joint campaign statements by both the Republicans and the Democrats. As for the Republicans themselves, I think it's an open question whether Donald Trump really has much time or bandwidth to focus on the question of the DPRK. At the moment, he is now facing a much changed campaign. When it comes to policy towards the region, I think his focus is likely to be much more on China rather than on the DPRK per se. And if anything, what we will see, whoever wins, I think in November, is a renewed focus on getting allies to do more to meet their own defense needs. Donald Trump has come out in the last day or so saying that allies will need to spend 3% of GDP on defense. That's a major change. That's likely to create, I think, a lot of pressure in Seoul, Tokyo, and elsewhere. So I think the more cautious and I think more accurate interpretation is to say that the United States at the moment will not back away from that policy of focusing on denuclearization, and at the same time will strengthen deterrence. And that's going to be a very key part in keeping the region stable.
The reports of the U.S. dropping the denuclearization goal of North Korea have reignited debate on South Korea's nuclearization. Professor Lim, what's your take on the issue?
Well, first of all, let me just clear what this. I personally, I'm against that idea, again, the nuclear armament by ourselves. The extended deterrence, of course, we already have a very robust extended deterrence capability with the alliance of U.S. However, of course, people, more and more Korean people are really concerned about this unbalanced situations between the North and South. Even though, of course, our conventional military capability, of course, is way beyond, again, the North Korea's conventional military capacity. However, as long as they have nuke and as long as they have a delivery system, again, it can be absolutely threatening to our own people. So people, again, asking more like a balance. Some will say, it might be just a balance of threat, but anyhow, more and more South Korean people want a balanced situation. That is why, again, if you take any public poll data, it depends on, of course, by which institution did the survey, but still approximately between like a 60 and 70, or even sometimes more than 70% of the Korean respondents support that idea. The thing is, we have to think about aftermath. Hypothetically, let's say, again, that we have our own nuclear weapons. Of course, we might have some technologies, we have some financial resources to do this. However, again, we have to think about aftermath. Again, it will really trigger, I would say, again, the nuclear dominoes in this region, which cannot be positive at all for peace and stability in this region. And as long as, peace and stability is shaken, in this region? If so, the global peace, again, the world peace cannot be expected in a positive way either. So again, I personally do, even though I understand why, again, the Korean people are more supportive for that kind of idea, but realistically, it's not that feasible. And second, again, it's not, I don't say, again, that it's a desirable option.
Dr. Nielsen-Wright, South Korea's National Intelligence Service has raised questions about North Korea's missile production capabilities to fully operate its 250 new missile launchers unveiled earlier this month. What's your take on this, and how do you gauge the threat of the new missile launchers?
Well, I think bottom line is we need to take the threat from North Korea very, very seriously. This deployment of 250 missile launchers is consistent with a much more belligerent approach on the part of Kim Jong-un that we've seen over the last few months and years, in fact. We know, of course, that the North has stepped up its rhetoric. It's torn up its commitment to the idea, the principle of reunification, a major shift in the political stance of the regime. There's also been evidence of considerable efforts to challenge the integrity of the borders between the two countries. Missile firing near the northern limit line, the reinforcement of the border fortifications at the DMZ, and all of this, of course, very much reinforced by Kim Jong-un's new strategic partnership with Russia. And therefore, you can see this more emboldened approach, and that would therefore suggest that we need to take the deployment of these missiles, these missile batteries, which have an extended range that can extend beyond Seoul, very seriously. However, I think the position of the National Intelligence Service of South Korea, which is cautious in not overinterpreting this development, I think is the right one. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, what are North Korea's missile capabilities? Your audience will be aware, of course, of the reports of some 11,000 shipments of arms and munitions to Russia to support its war in Ukraine from the DPRK. That's one critical factor in explaining the strengthened relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow. And therefore, it's an open question, and legitimate question, whether North Korea, even with these new batteries, will have sufficient missiles to actually pose a direct threat to South Korea in this new, more extended fashion. So I think that's one reason, I think, to be cautious, but also the question about North Korea's intentions. As we said during the Cold War, we have to focus both on capabilities and intentions. And that raises the obvious question, why would Kim Jong-un at this stage be contemplating direct military action against South Korea? Some of this may be, in effect, not only an effort to bolster his position at home as the military commander of the country, to demonstrate to his own people that he is strong and capable and that the country has enhanced its military capabilities, but also to deflect attention away from problems at home, not least economic problems, the impact of the recent flooding that has been a source of concern to Kim Jong-un. We've seen him patrolling areas of the country where the flooding has been most severe, and therefore pivoting to the military side of things is a way of reassuring his public at home that even with these difficulties on the home front, as it were, economically and in terms of the natural environment, the country remains resilient. Finally, looking ahead to November, Kim may be making his own calculations by reinforcing the North's military capabilities, including with the deployment of these missile batteries. He may be sending a signal to Washington, either to Donald Trump or to Kamala Harris, about the importance of taking North Korea seriously. This may be, if you like, a pre-negotiating gambit on his part to try and ensure that once the election is out of the way, and if the door opens to new talks between Washington and Pyongyang, he can present North Korea in the most credible and convincing way as a military actor on the peninsula.
And Dr. Nielsen-Wright, Kim Jong-un oversaw a performance test of what the North called suicide drones on Saturday, calling for more production to bolster the country's war preparedness. The Pentagon has said it takes threats from the drones seriously. What's your analysis of the suicide drones? Could there be a possible drone cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow?
Well, it would make sense, wouldn't it? When you see the the activity of Russia in the war in Ukraine and the use of drone technology, Russia is an obvious partner. We know that North Korea under Kim Jong-un has been serious about developing all manner of different drone technology, not just these so-called suicide drones, surveillance drones. It was back in 2022 when South Korea had to confront, frankly, the embarrassment of seeing North Korean drones penetrate into the airspace around Seoul, as close to the presidential office. This is a reminder, if you like, of North Korea's ability not only to threaten South Korea, but also to engage in, if you like, technical propaganda wars. And this is something that is really important to Kim Jong-un. It makes sense both in terms of his military capabilities and those political, rhetorical propaganda dynamics that I referred to. Having said that, in order to really develop this technology, it's had to work closely with Russia. It was in 2023 when North Korea held a major military parade in which it unveiled some of its new drone technology. The then Russian defense minister was present at that parade, and I think that's, if you like, pretty strong circumstantial evidence to suggest that Russia and North Korea could be cooperating in this area. It's not the only country, of course, that might be a useful partner to North Korea. There has been talk about closer ties with Iran, which also might have some of this critical drone technology. And if we extend the technology dimension more broadly to think about dual-use technology, then there are other countries, including China, where North Korea may be in a position to develop access to the sort of technology that will allow it to develop a more sophisticated drone capability. And it's in that area, areas where technological cooperation between Chinese and North Korean universities like Kim Il-sung University, the Pyongyang University for Science and Technology, shows signs of, I think, troubling evidence that North Korean technical officials and academics may be able to evade international sanctions, even, dare I say it, in cooperation with U.S. universities. This dual-use technology needs to be monitored very, very carefully, I think, because there's no doubt that North Korea has been moving in a steady direction to enhance its drone capabilities.
And very quickly, before we let you go, Professor Lim, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is in Beijing for high-level talks. What sort of outcome do you expect from the visit?
Well, first of all, I think many people feel like pretty much, relieved to see these kind of continuous efforts to have a dialogue between Washington and Beijing, while they are still, of course, competing in many different ways. Of course, they do have various agenda topics to discuss, but number one priority will be absolutely the cross-strait issues or stability in the South China Sea, South and East China Sea. These kind of more like maritime security-related issues will be, I think they already discussed today. Again, they did have meetings, and they are trying to probably upgrade their dialogues, to maintain the stability. So absolutely, these kind of more military stability is one issue. And at the same time, if we recall our memory, even the President Biden and the President Xi, when they met in the San Francisco during their APEC meeting, again, the fentanyl-like drug issue was one of the top priority, which was discussed between the two, which is pretty unusual compared to the past. So this kind of more like, social issue, those that can be caused by the drug, that can be, I think, one of the agenda. Or another probably agenda we need to probably pay attention is, again, the President Biden, his term is ending, so probably they might have discussed on the chance to have probably the last summit between the President Biden and the President Xi. We'll see. I think that they already discussed many different topics, and I'm also looking forward to seeing the outcomes.
All right, due to time constraint, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Professor Lim and Dr. Nilsson Wright, for your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.